Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. We are come to you this morning to talk about cooperatives and the benefits of co-ops. We're celebrating this year 100 years that NCBA, National Cooperative Business Association, has been in business. They started in March of 1916. So we are celebrating their 100th year throughout this year. And today we have Mr. Dennis Bolling on, who just was inducted to the Cooperative Hall of Fame. Good morning, Dennis.
Good morning.
How are you this day?
Well, I'm wonderful. How about yourself?
Great. You know, it was great watching you and listening to your story, and I would like to tell the people here as I talk to you about your wonderful history and why you were inducted to the Hall of Fame. But how did you get introduced to the cooperatives?
Well, like many people in the ag sector, I grew up on a small farm in Kentucky. I actually was a biology and chemistry major, as I mentioned, and planned to teach high school biology. Somewhere along the way, I went to work for Ralston Purina, and then went to work for the Louisville Bank for Cooperatives, part of the Farm Credit System. So I kind of came into the co-op movement in a very practical business perspective. On our farm growing up, we did some business with a co-op, Southern States, out of Richmond, Virginia, but we really weren't in proximity to a co-op outlet. So I came in from a very practical business perspective.
So as a kid, you worked with what co-op in?
Southern States, the large feed farm supply energy co-op headquartered there in Richmond, Virginia.
Okay, so that's a producer co-op then, right? You buy your products from it.
Right. And we bought primarily feed for our livestock.
You know, I envy you guys that learned about co-ops at a very early age. I didn't learn about it until maybe 20 years ago when I started managing housing co-ops.
Oh,
So it's I would have loved to have learned about it much earlier. But then you majored in biology and chemistry, and I majored in math and chemistry, and was going to major in biology as I was struggling. So we have something similar, science. And I went to Kentucky State for one semester. So I was in your state for a little bit in 1965. And your last name is Bolling, and you went to school in Bowling Green.
Okay. I did. Okay. At Western Kentucky, yes.
So how was the experience like at the bank?
Well, I had, again, started out from a very practical standpoint. I worked before I went into service with a Ralston Purina feed dealer. We were in a small town in Kentucky where my wife was teaching home economics, and so began working in agribusiness. When I was then to the point where I joined the bank, we were providing normal lines of credit, long-term loans to cooperative organizations. So it was a very easy transition to be on the banker side. What I brought to the table in those days was some experience. At Purina, I was involved in several aspects, but most predominantly dealer financial services. So I was involved in local businesses and getting them financing and providing, again, sources of credit to buy our product. And the Bank for Co-ops in those days, and continues under CoBank, as the primary commercial lender for cooperative organizations. So it very much had the same feel of any co-op where you're engaged to support the members. You're very engaged from a relations standpoint, but you're also very engaged in a business perspective to help the co-ops make sure they've got adequate financing in place. It's structured effectively and efficiently. And so it was a very business-oriented relationship, but very much of a co-op foundation.
So you got into it at the dealer level, and then working with the dealers in their financial structuring. Then you had experience, so that the bank needed that experience, so they hired you to come in and work with the dealers.
Exactly. We had many cooperatives throughout the Midwest that were also, selling feed just like any other commercial operation. And I joined the bank in the early 80s at a time when the ag economy was under a lot of stress. And certainly, one of the well-known attributes of the Farm Credit System is they step up and help farmers and their co-ops in times of need. And so in the Louisville region, which covered Indiana and Illinois, Ohio, that part of the Midwest, including Kentucky and Tennessee, we had a lot of grain operations under a lot of stress. And so the bank reached out very prudently, and fortunately for me, and hired some people with some experience to work with grain elevators during that time.
All right, so you moved from the bank. Where did you go next?
Well, while I was at the bank, I supervised a team of loan officers, and then I also handled some co-op accounts myself as their primary lender. And one of them was the parent company of United Producers, and it was called Producers Livestock Association. So as their account officer, I worked with the management team and the board for roughly 7 or 8 years. During that time, I did a lot of board training with my accounts as well as others. So when my predecessor looked to retire, that particular company, Producers Livestock, approached me about applying for the CEO job. And so that happened in 1989, and was fortunate enough then to go to work for what was one of my accounts at the bank.
So it's very interesting. You were working with, was it Houston Perina, working with the dealers. The bank sees you and they say, hey, come over here and help us. And then some of your accounts, you're working with them and you're training them and showing them how to work. And when their CEO retires, they say, look, won't you come over here and take this job?
Well, that's kind of how it rolls.
Okay.
But, that's interesting enough. And I, in doing some guest lecturing at Ohio State, I get asked that question like, well, that's kind of a circuitous career path. And I said, well, it's really an example of how co-ops work together. There's a very openness about sharing and willingness to help. And as opportunities come up, we tend to look for, folks that have a similar viewpoint and attitude about cooperatives. And in my case, I was very fortunate that it worked out, from a career and a job standpoint.
Well, you say we're very open. The fifth principle of co-ops is education, training, and information, which you know about, and I talk a lot about on this program because that's the first reason that I liked co-ops was this training part. I taught 12 years of my career, and I did not want to be a teacher. You wanted to be one. My mother was a teacher, and I knew how hard she worked and how little she got paid and how little respected she was in the community. It used to be teachers were very well respected, even if they weren't paid much, but that wasn't the case in the 60s and 70s. So I didn't want to teach, but I ended up teaching to keep from going to Vietnam. And I liked it. So I did that for 12 years. I really like when people learn. I like seeing people that get turned on when folks learn something. And so with that fifth principle in the co-op piece, and as I've gone to co-op meetings, I've experienced exactly what you just said, is that people just share information. They don't hold on to it like you're a competitor, and therefore I'm not going to give you my secret.
Oh, exactly. Okay. Well, I think co-op businesses are very sophisticated, prudent business people. Cooperative businesses have trade secrets just like any corporation, any business, any organization. But they're very, again, firmly committed to helping each other. And so to the extent that they can share information, share expertise without breaching confidences and protected information, they're certainly very open and willing to do that. And I've certainly experienced that through my career. I've had many of my counterparts in management, share information, share their expertise, share some ideas, and they do it out of a genuine respect for the cooperative structure.
Well, that also gets to the sixth principle, which is cooperation among cooperatives. So that's one of part of sharing that information is to help each other. You talked about this United Producers, Inc., and when I was at the dinner where you got inducted, I was just amazed at what all that organization does. but I was also amazed that there was some problems early on in your career there. Can you explain I think it was the cattle fraud?
Exactly. Well, we had, like many co-ops back in the 80s into the 90s, we're dealing with economy of scale issues. And so we merged with some other companies, and we acquired a couple of other livestock cooperatives. And one of the entities that we merged with had a limited liability company operation, and the principal in that perpetrated a Ponzi scheme, whereby he would take money from investors, invest them in cattle feeding operations, and then he would take money from somebody else, pay a nominal return to the investor to kind of keep them happy. And a classic definition of a Ponzi scheme, that pyramids. And, if the music stops or the markets collapse, there's not enough money to pay back the investors. And this individual did that, falsified records, ended up spending 10 years in jail. The FBI fully investigated, and we learned more about being a victim of a crime than we ever thought we would. But essentially, this individual siphoned off money, falsified records, falsified the audit, such that we became embroiled in litigation and those types of challenges, simply because we were ultimately the parent co-op, large company in Ohio. So people were looking for somebody to get money out of.
Yeah, pay them back.
We were not, obligated on any of their debts. We were arm's length. So what we were faced with was being embroiled in just massive litigation. And as we all know these days, you can be sued over virtually anything at the drop of a hat. And so as that escalated, we were faced with the harsh reality of the cost of litigation and the company collapsing. We simply were, spending millions of dollars on the cost of litigation. And we did a lot of soul searching and tried to resolve all the claims. None of the claims were, against us. We were, I guess, somewhat victimized, as the U.S. Attorney General characterized it. So we made the decision that we would take the company through a Chapter 11 bankruptcy to, handle those things. It lasted only about 6 months. We were sanitized through that. And there were some unique things that happened from a co-op perspective. I've said in many speeches, I don't recommend it.
Dennis, let's stop right here a minute and come back and talk about this bankruptcy and how you all worked out of it and what came at the end of it. We have to take our first break right now to get the news, the weather, and traffic, and we'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial.
1450 WOL.
Information is power. That's why WOL is a great, great partner to have this program, because the National Co-op Bank is sponsoring this program to give you the information that you might need to find a co-op. First, get the benefits of the co-op, and then you could go find one to either shop or join, a grocery co-op, or you could get a housing co-op. There's all kinds of ways. Or you could go start your own, a worker co-op. If 4 or 5 people come together, you perhaps can start your own co-op to solve whatever community problem you may have, including getting work. And right now we have Dennis Bolling on the phone with us. We were talking about United Producers, Inc. They had a issue where they were sued. And Dennis, I got to tell you, I understand that. I've been in business now for 24 years. I didn't get sued for the first 18. And then it seemed like everybody would sue me for anything and any reason. If you look at some of these suits, you would think that I was the worst guy in the world because they would claim anything. One guy said that he had a breathing problem and said there was mold in there and I had caused it and I didn't fix it, and he was suing me for $600,000, and I was really concerned that this man's health was at issue, and the way he sounded like he might die from this mold. It turned out, after getting all kinds of experts and a whole lot of legal money like you're talking about, it turned out that they had spilt water in his unit, and his unit was filthy, and that's what caused the mold. Okay, wasn't nothing I did. But it took a long time and a lot of my time and money to get this resolved. So, yeah, I got it. I understand. I know now, if you're not in the business, you may not understand this, but can you keep telling us what was going on? You got this massive litigation, thousands of dollars, or was it millions? And now you took a Chapter 11. Now, which one is the Chapter 11 versus the Chapter 7?
Well, Chapter 11 is the opportunity for a business to basically restructure based on any number of factors. Our case was, according to the legal experts, was pretty benign. It was a single issue. They didn't impanel a trustee. It was pretty much a mechanism to deal with the litigation. So we were fortunate in that regard, even though it was millions of dollars. It was controllable in the sense that it was kind of a singular focus. Mm-hmm. And you're exactly right in your comments. It becomes such a distraction. It takes away from the business and taking care of the members. But during that process, you're continuing to operate. So you're certainly are doing business like normal, which is the real basis with which you'll succeed. But you do have this. We described it as, unfortunately, a cancer we had to contain. Mm-hmm. And so we did that, and we're able to get all that behind us in, just a relatively short period of time by legal standards. The legal system, is tough because you have those situations where you have, in theory, a jury of your peers, but in our particular case, unless you happen to be a pretty astute business person dealing with these corporate structures, agricultural kind of issues, folks just don't have a basis to understand some of them. So it's easy to say, well, gee, let's find somebody with deep pockets and they should pay for everybody else's problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's money driven. In this case, people lost money, so they're trying to recoup. In some cases, people are just trying to get money out of you. And
exactly.
The legal system, as I have learned, it is very difficult to wade through that stuff. And what looks like it should be common sense, the law doesn't necessarily, it's not common. It doesn't necessarily
We were fortunate that we had an outstanding law firm, very much understood cooperative issues, very, top drawer as far as their legal expertise. So, again, they have a practice that deals with organizations like ours that really enhanced, helping us get through that. Well,
it says if it doesn't kill you, you'll be stronger. Did you find that to be the case?
Well, we did. And, I'll really admit going through it, there were a lot of days that I kind of didn't believe that. But the thing that I think I made this comment at the Hall of Fame event, the members stuck with us, but we also had a pretty strong commitment as a management team and board that we were going to focus on surviving in order to take care of our farmers. And that kind of commitment and affirmation that that's what we were about really gave us a lot of confidence. Now, we had, lots of setbacks along the way, but we were singularly committed to surviving to ensure our members a future for their marketings. So with that kind of confidence, and again, the team that we had legally, we were able to navigate it. Farmers stuck with us. Farmers did business with us all through the legal crisis. Many times when a company is dealing with that, people leave. Yeah, it's the proverbial rat leaving the ship. We actually had an increase in numbers. And so
I remember you closed your doors for a week. You shut down?
We did. We said, look, in order for us to affect this process, we need to essentially push the pause button. We need to get all of our financing in place. We need to, make sure checks have cleared, those types of things, so that when we push the button to begin the legal process, the real question, would the members show back up? And they did. So, and I think that really goes to your earlier comment about how critical communication, education, those types of things are in a member co-op. We told the members everything as we went along. There were many times they were getting, lots of mail from us, lots of email, but they were fully informed. And I think because of that, they were able to make a good business judgment, understood that this was something that we were victimized by, and, it was in our mutual interest to see that UPI survived.
The values of co-ops are based on the values of self-help. self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, solidarity. And it sounds like you all had solidarity. In the tradition of the founders of cooperative members believe in the ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. And that's what you're saying you did. You cared for each other. You were open, you were honest, and you were responsible to the members.
Well, I mean, we didn't stand up and, say this is the badge and this is what we're doing. But that is, in fact, the innate value system of a co-op. And, we didn't have it on placards. We said, this is who we are. This is what we're dealing with. It's your co-op. Here's what we plan to do. Here's our game plan. If you believe in that, stick with us. And, again, I think I believe in just good, decent people. They hear a reasonable argument and, make sense, and they can make good, informed decisions, and did. We didn't have a disproportionate amount of Monday morning quarterback second guessing what we should have done, this sort of thing. Farmers deal with risk every day, and they have to manage that risk. They have to make informed decisions, make judgment calls. And so when the co-op is facing something, they can understand the process. We are just an extension of their farm in many cases. And so, you're talking to your family. It's an easy conversation to have.
I was thinking this morning we've had like 18 days of rain in the last 21 days, and we're going to have some this weekend. And I was wondering how that's affecting the farmers. You can get too much rain or not enough rain. When you talk about managing risk, things that are not in your control that can affect your crop or your livestock.
And the consumer goes to the store and still wants the product there
at a reasonable price.
Outside, we can't get the crops in.
So in co-ops, the principles are voluntary and open membership, and the one I wanted to get to was democratic member control. So in that democratic member control is normally one member, one vote, but they have to make informed decisions, and that's why getting all this information, training, education is so important. And the third one is member economic participation. Put some money in to join, and if there's a profit, then often there's money that could be given back, but they decide. And the fourth one is autonomy and independence. So I say to people, you have to co-op the members own and control the business. A lot of education, and we talked about cooperation among cooperatives. That's the sixth one, and the seventh one is concern for the overall community, and that community could be the farm in Ohio, or it could be the Midwest community, or the U.S. community, or the world community, but very much concern for community, which is another reason I love co-ops. As you went through this, you said you increased memberships as you were going through all of this negative stuff. It must have been a lot of negative publicity, too.
Well, fortunately, there wasn't a lot of negative publicity.
It was not? Oh, good.
And we had geared up to, with a PR firm to deal with that.
That was going to be my question to you. Okay.
Well, it's one of those things where the local paper there in Columbus, the Columbus Dispatch, did a brief article, but I think, folks, kind of heard the story and said, well, okay, this is a process. They're working through it. And so there just wasn't a lot of sound bites that could come from it. Okay. And, we tried to answer questions before they were asked. Now our competitors fanned the flames that, we're going under and Dennis Bolling's going to jail.
Okay. Well, okay. That is negative press. Okay.
But as you well know, in business, you got to be pretty thick-skinned. And so, the old saying goes, if I had $1 for every one of those, you're a wealthy man.
That's right. We're going to cut. We have to take our second break. But a PR firm for everybody out there is a public relation firm. Then their whole role is to help create the image that you might want. But we have our second break that's coming up. And Dennis, this is fascinating. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about this, but get into how stronger you got going through all of this negative work. But we'll take a second break and we'll be right back.
1450 WOL.
Back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Program is Everything Co-op. We're talking about cooperative business model, the benefits of a cooperative, how people can come together to start a co-op. There are different organizations out there that can help. The Cooperative Development Foundation, CDF. You could go to cdf.coop cdf.coop, and they have different grants and monies available to help you get started in co-ops. There's a lot of different ways of getting started, and people have information to help you to get started in a co-op if you want to start a co-op. U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops is one of those organizations that can help you if you want to start any kind of business you can think of. Dennis Bolling is our guest today. He was inducted to the Hall of Fame. He's a 2016 inductee to the Cooperative Hall of Fame, which is the highest honor that one can get. It's called the Heroes of this Cooperative Business Model. His whole life he's been in it. He started out wanting to be a biology teacher, went to Ralston Purina and worked there for a while, and then the Louisville Cooperative Bank.
Louisville Bank for Co-ops, yes.
Louisville Bank for Cooperatives saw his skill sets, and they offered him a job to come in and work with the dealers. And then he was working with different people, and the people at United Producers, Inc. Saw his skill set. When their CEO retired, they reached out and grabbed him, brought him over, and he found himself in this big legal mess, which he had to work out of. And can you tell me how many co-ops, farmers, are members of United Producers, Inc.?
United Producers has about 40,000 members. And our structure is just as you described. It's an open membership. It's one member, one vote. And so any livestock farmer throughout the 10 or so states that the company is primarily involved in becomes a member. So that's obviously a economic and logistics challenge when you look at that many members. But it's a pretty strong base across the Midwest. It's typical large operations. It's small family farms. It's beef producers, pork producers, lamb producers. So typical array of Midwestern livestock farms. Beef,
lamb, pork, livestock. 40,000 members, 40,000 members. Okay, that's large.
Plus or minus, sure.
Okay. So why would they join United Producers, Inc.? What's the benefits of joining and coming together?
Well, one of the primary benefits is a cooperative like ours gives a farmer access to the marketplace. You know, a farmer who may produce, let's say, 1,000 head of beef cattle seems like a lot of cattle, but when you've got to ship those cattle, get them to a processing plant, the processing plants are large mega food companies like a Tyson's, large companies like that. A co-op like ours becomes the intermediary. We bargain, negotiate the price or the contracts for those farmers to those processors. So the advantage is it's just the economy of scale. We're negotiating for 1,000 of those farmers versus one farmer trying to negotiate on their own behalf. So it is a principle of marketing where you're just combining your numbers and leveraging those numbers. So that's the real economic benefit to the farmer is to be able to get the negotiating, the bargaining power of their numbers being marketed with other farmers. Now, that's in addition to other services that co-ops offer. UPI, for example, has a loan subsidiary that finances farmers. We do a lot of commodity brokerage, risk management business. So there are other services, but primarily it is the bargaining and the marketing of their product.
So is this called a marketing co-op?
Yes.
All right. So for everybody out there, I'll go over this every now and then. There's co-ops can be any business that you can think of. If it's owned and controlled by the employees, it's called a worker co-op. If it's owned and controlled by the people that uses the products and services, it's called a consumer co-op. And credit unions and housing co-ops are examples of that, consumer co-ops. Now, you have the other two major ones. They have a lot of different forms of co-ops, but if people come together to buy the materials that they need in their work, it's called a purchasing co-op. Farmers could come together if they're growing things and buy seed and fertilizers together, get a more volume, you get a lower price and get a better product, and you have somebody in the middle to do that. And then you have the marketing co-op, which is on the other end of it. Farmers, artists, and the group of people come together and they say, okay, if we have somebody working that know that have the skill set to work with the Tysons or these people that are going to buy this product, then they can negotiate and get a better product. And we also have access to more markets than this one farmer with 1,000. He can't get to all of the different markets. He may not, even Ohio, he may not be able to get to California or New York. But by going through United Producers, then it gives them more markets and therefore a better price. And it also reduces risk because farmers in the olden days before co-ops, I don't know what that is, they had to go out and buy their seed and their fertilizer and whatever, make sure they had water and whatever to produce these things, or cattle or whatever they had to get. Then they had to do the work to produce, and then they had to sell it. So they had to do all of this, and it made them at risk for everything. Did I sum it up pretty good?
Well, no, absolutely. That's spot on. And I think that really points to the self-help provision that, it allows you to get some help on risk, access to certain, inputs, and I think access to the markets. You're exactly right that, a farmer in southern Indiana may not justify owning trucks or, having those more corporate kind of relationships, but they want access to the competitiveness of the markets. And so that is, in fact, exactly what a co-op does. It opens those doors for its members, whether it's an artist co-op or, like you say, any type of co-op in any sector, any business. The principles are the same.
The other thing I like about co-ops is one member, one vote. You just said you could have very large farmer member. So you have a large farm that has, 10,000 or 100,000 head of cattle? I don't know what a large farm is. What's the magnitude of it? And then you have a small farm with 100 head of cattle. And one member, one vote says that they both have the same amount of vote when it comes, as opposed to in our capitalistic world, the ones that have the largest, the most money, can buy the most shares of stock in a company, then they get more vote, they get more power. And that's why too often, and it's happening in our political world right now, too often the people with the money are the ones that have the power and the say of what laws are going to happen or what policies are going to be in place. And so, again, why I like co-ops is that everyday people, lower, middle class and lower, can have the same say so as upper class, or the one percenters, if you will, if they're all in a co-op.
Well, that's precisely true in United Producers. The business structure is complicated. The governance is complicated. We're dealing in a corporate world. We're competing with non-co-ops. So there's lots and lots of nuances of those systems. But the bedrock principle, it's owned by the members, and it's one member, one vote. Now, you may have to deliver the business very complicated, but the bedrock principles is really the tie that binds co-ops together. I
know you're retired now. I don't know what that means for you, but I got a sense that doesn't mean you're sitting at home all day long. But is there anything about your career you would do different? Did you like what you've done?
Oh, absolutely. I found out very early on that being in business satisfied my desire to teach. You very quickly realize that in management, you're carrying out the functions of teaching by convincing people to go along with an idea you have, or even dealing with adversity. So the principles of teaching are applied every day in management, because it is a people business. You can have all of the technology, all of the robotics, but you still have people in the decision process. So from that standpoint, I viewed every board meeting, every staff meeting, almost every interaction as a teachable moment. And so that was very fortunate for me. The one thing I would have liked to have done different is, the economics are challenging such that, I wish we would have had more money to do more philanthropic things. I would like to have been able to be more engaged overtly with young farmers, but you kind of have to pick your priorities. And so, if I had those do-overs, I would hope to have tried to pursue those things a little more aggressively. But part of the management, you've got to realize that you can't do it all. And so do the best what you have and while you're here, but you certainly can't do it all.
I just know you want more money for philanthropic things and work with young farmers. And both of those, you're just sort of helping more people.
Oh, absolutely. I'm doing a couple of things in retirement. One is involved with training and development, kind of helping shepherd that within UPI. I'm working with the Farm Credit Council on some board of director training, which I've done extensively for a number of years. I'm volunteering pretty extensively right now with a major co-op project at Ohio State. So, and all those things are opportunities for me to learn, but they do keep you engaged in, working with other people.
So tell me about, and tell the audience about your director training certification program. What was that about?
Well, it came about really under the wisdom that the management team at the Louisville Bank for Cooperatives had. In the early 80s, as I mentioned, there's a lot of economic stress, and so individuals found themselves elected to boards, co-ops, and unfortunately didn't have any real extensive training for that role. It's different than running your own farm business. So we began developing a program out of the Louisville Bank, which others have picked up, in many facets, to train boards of directors on good governance and other aspects of being a director. And that's true in a co-op as well as a publicly traded company. Sarbanes-Oxley comes along, and those things become more mandated in publicly traded companies. But it really became an opportunity to recognize that very successful boards of directors are made up of farmers who are very successful in their own right in running their farm business, and those that have got some enhanced skills in the role of a director. And so we saw that very early on as a need and pursued it from that perspective, because the board of directors are ultimately people in the co-op that are accountable back to the members. And if the better trained and equipped they are to carry out that job on behalf of the members, then it becomes a win-win.
In my property management business, I found that co-ops are successful if they have good governance first and good management second, because the governance, that board of directors, they're the ones that either are responsible for hiring and or firing or setting policies that the management has to deliver on. And the good of that, Dennis, the good part of it is they have to have knowledge and integrity. And I find that integrity is more important than the knowledge, because I've got a 16 unit senior co-op that there's not a lot of formal education, but they stick to their bylaws and their house rules, and they make sure they hold each other responsible, and it's run extremely well. My only problem with them is getting them to raise, because it's a senior and they have fixed income, raising their carrying charge as their expenses go up. It's been my only battle. But just night before last, they raised 8%. This is only third increase in 15 years, and they're falling behind in their savings. But we have these open conversations, and I get everyday people that can make these tough decisions. Even like an 8.4% increase, they are increasing their own carrying charge, and they can see why. We go over it, and they do the budgets and all of that. So I like this good governance, and I really want to come back. We've got to take our last break. The hour goes by real quick when we're having fun and I'm learning. But I want to come back and talk about what's in this certification program. This is for my knowledge, and I also want the other people here. Here's the kind of training that goes on that you have to know in order to be on the board. And I have found out that adults really get the training. They get the numbers. They may not have known that they could do the math, but they really get it when they have to apply it. So we'll be right back, and we'll talk more about this training.
1450 WOL.
The National Cooperative Bank is sponsoring this program. My name is Vernon Oakes. This is Everything Cooperative, and we have Mr. Dennis Bolling on the line with us. Dennis, it sounds like, you have worked in business, capital business, and then you worked for a bank, and then you came back into business, a co-op business, and then you have retired from the co-op business to do what you really want to do, and that is education.
Absolutely.
Which you started with. Okay. So I would really like to get into the weeds a little bit about this certification program. I'd like to know, what do you find that in order to be to have good governance, what knowledge does the directors have to have?
Well, I think they, as you alluded to it, I think people have to kind of have a value system that's compatible with co-op principles. They have to believe in the value of those kinds of things, as a person. from there, I think directors need to have a good understanding of their role as a board member versus that of management. They've hired the management to run the enterprise, and so they have a very different fiduciary policy kind of role. I think they have to have a keen understanding that they're accountable to the members, how they balance communication and confidentiality and those things. And then I think they have to have some financial acumen. They don't have to have formal education around finance, but the co-op is a business in the sense that it's providing economic benefit to the member. And I think collectively, directors that have some training those skills, some self-development is kind of an expectation. All of that kind of forms the leadership necessary for good governance.
What do you mean by a fiduciary role?
Well, as you mentioned, they're going to hire the management. They're going to approve the budget. Depending on the type of co-op, they may be approving major capital expenditures. The example you gave of the housing group, they're voting to increase their own cost. And so it would be very easy to look at that as a selfish impact and say, well, gee, I don't want my expenses to go up 8%. But they have to understand that this is part of a bigger business formula, why it's justified, why it's needed. And so that takes some fiduciary responsibility that they can look beyond their own checkbook and see, for the greater good of the co-op members, that community, we have to be good students or stewards, rather, of their money.
When I first heard fiduciary responsibility, I thought that was the financial responsibility that they had to make sure that everything was right. But I've since found out that it is the board is responsible for everything. They're ultimately responsible for everything. Every aspect of the business, the board is responsible. And then they hire management. In this case, for a property man, they hire a third-party management company. And it says in our contract, we are supposed to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. So 7, 8, 9, 10 things we're supposed to do. And then they are still responsible to make sure we do what they have hired us to do. And the same thing when they hire you to be the CEO, there are certain things they want you to do, and they have to make sure you're doing what they want you to do. So they're ultimately responsible, and I've tried to get that across to board members when they say the problem here is, we don't have enough money coming in or we don't have enough savings. It's management's fault. I'm going, wait a minute now, you got something wrong here. It's ultimately your responsibility.
Yeah, I think fiduciary, in my mind, is a little broader than just financial.
Right.
But boards have to think long term. Management can come and go. They have to think about the long-term existence of the co-op, the success of the co-op, including the financial health of the co-op. So they've got to be very much engaged in strategic planning and long-term budgeting. So it is a pretty important responsibility. And again, I think understanding, as you said, they can't just abdicate that to management. They are ultimately accountable to the members.
Well, when you talk about the long term, and I've heard on this program, and we've been on now for 2.5 years, but stewardship is a word that comes up a lot. And I only heard that in church before.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. We have to be good stewards of what God gives us. And so now I'm getting that a co-op member, the board member, have to be good stewards. They have to be looking long term. They have to do strategic planning to find and make decisions that are best for the group. And that's another reason I like it. It's not there's 16 seniors, and there were 10 of them at the meeting. So they're making decisions of what's good for the group, even though it may not be best for them individually, any one of them.
And that's hard for a board member. It's just human nature to think about your own situation, but you have been elected to care for the assets that are owned by somebody else, some other group. And so stewardship, whether it has a religious connotation or not, is a very good way to characterize that responsibility. Now, I think that as a value resonates well in farm country and with most people. And so it's a pretty easy segue to that kind of a concept.
The first time, just thinking, Jim Jones was on the program, and he was with NASCO, the North American Student Cooperatives. And he was saying that a lot of the students come in, at best will be there for 4, maybe 5 years. Sometimes it's 1 or 2. And they make decisions to save for future generations of students. So, because they're not even there for the long term. Their long term is 4 or 5 years. but they're making decisions today to save for the next set of students. And they say they get that somebody did that for them. Somebody started this co-op, is student housing co-ops, and normally the price in the student co-op is less than the dorms are around, and normally you get a better product because people take better care of it. So that was the first time I heard it, and I guess if students can get it, older folks should be too.
Less so it should. But that is the critical link, that you've got to be willing to think about the long term. You're paying management to worry about the short term, but long term, you want that student co-op to be there for, 10 classes down the road. You want the housing co-op to be there for residents, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And you want a co-op like UPI to be there for, the next generation of people that's going to be growing our food. So the principles are very applicable across, any type of co-op.
Amalgamated in New York as one of the older housing co-ops. And I think they've been, somehow in my head, and I may not have it right, but 90 years. I mean, it's been quite some time.
A long time.
That they've been there. And I know of one that some research was done in Atlanta. They had celebrated like 8 years ago their 40 years, and they didn't have a mortgage anymore. Wildwood in Atlanta. So long time, 40, 50, 90, 100, 150 years. You have this housing, and a lot of times it's affordable housing, and the idea is to keep it affordable for generations to come. Now, let's move to the Ohio State University. You didn't put the in when you talked about Ohio State.
Well, I didn't go there, but I get chastised for that a lot.
Okay. Well, I've talked to people from Ohio State, and boy, they have really
about it.
So what are you doing there with them?
Well, we several of us got together and worked with the university to create a cooperative center based on some existing contributions and some new ones. Center now has a director, and it's designed to simply ensure that cooperative principles, kind of get threaded through the curriculum or other initiatives that may be embraced. Our project that we're working on right now is to bring in some guest lectures as CEOs of various co-ops, Land O'Lakes, Nationwide, Welch's, whomever it may be, to come in and talk to students and faculty about the cooperative business model. And so, again, it's kind of a virtual center. It's there to help influence curriculum, to make sure, whether it's a business school or the ag school, that students have a exposure and understanding to cooperatives, not just public corporations. So
you said Land O'Lakes, Welch's, and what was the other one?
We've invited about 6 different co-ops, CEOs, nationwide.
Nationwide insurance, okay.
And we're going to have invited CHS Incorporated. Seems like there's 2 others.
You said Land O'Lakes, Welch's. What about Cabot Creamery?
We haven't approached Cabot. We have talked to CoBank. And, of course, UPI being right there in Columbus. Mm-hmm. So we've got about 6 co-ops that will fit the schedule that we have for speaking in some symposia as well as in some specific classes. So it's an opportunity to have students get exposed to co-ops. Ohio State happens to teach a class in co-ops, but this would be this center transcends just ag school. It's also engaged in a new major that they have jointly between the business school and the ag school. So I chair the advisory committee and am kind of doing the legwork to get those CEOs to come in and speak. And again, it's all about the education, reaching out.
Dennis, we only have about 30 seconds left. You have any last comment to tell people?
Well, I would first and foremost thank you and the program for making people aware of co-ops. Co-ops touch everyday lives, and in many cases people don't realize it. And in fact, I saw an item online where someone had contacted you and said, "Hey, tell us more. How do I find co-ops, housing co-ops in California?"
Okay.
So,
thank you, buddy.
I think you folks should be committed to that.
Thank you, and you can tell Chuck Snyder that because he's been very supportive from NCB. Thank you, everybody out there. This is a wonderful Thursday. I've learned a lot, and we'll see you next week. Have a great cooperative week.
1450 WOL.